Tale of Two Posters.
And just real quick, we each wanted to introduce ourselves, and then I'll kick us off. So I'm Eric Johnson. I'm the head of the Innovative Media Department here at VCU Libraries.
Hi, everyone. My name is Carla May Crookenville, and I'm the Arts Research Librarian at Capitol Libraries.
And my name is Hope Kelly, and I am the online librarian at both libraries.
It was the best of posters. It was the worst of posters. It was the age of design. It was the age of sloppiness. It was the epic of serif. It was the epic of sans serif. It was the season of light backgrounds. It was the season of dark backgrounds. It was the spring of readability. It was the winter of illegibility. Welcome to A Tale of Two Posters. So I am kicking us off. So we just thought that would be fun. I'm kicking us off today talking about poster design principles. And getting into that, I wanted to ask, what really is design? There are lots of definitions out there, of course, but I like to go with something like it's the choices that you make when putting something together that affect another person's experience of your product, or in this case, your poster. So sort of good design to me means that it eases the way of your reader while meeting your goals as the person presenting information. In general, as a designer, you do want to sort of reduce friction, right, that it takes for people to interact with your poster. So if it's cluttery or hard to read, they have to work harder. So good design means making things easier for people. And we do that through the choices we make. And smart choices are generally based on two kind of big ideas: that humans have evolved ways of perceiving their environment that we can use to our advantage. We'll talk about that in a second. And then when in doubt, make a choice that caters to an experience that your audience has already had. That way they don't have to learn like a new way of navigating your poster, because you're building on something that has come in the past. So when I talk about human evolution of perception, one big way that comes into play in poster design is basically how the human eye is instinctively drawn to things that stand out against a background, right? That's what this image shows. We're not gonna go into any detail about this, but we use that sort of built-in instinct to our advantage to help steer the eye around a poster or a designed object. And the way that's likeliest to poster, of course, is through things like bold text or different sizes of text or contrasting colors, spacing things out carefully. And of course, with electronic posters, as opposed to print posters, or at least for some of them, you even get to mess with motion as well. And I mentioned all that, again, not to get way into the weeds about human perception, but to show that basically we do control our choices. And that our choices aren't, in fact, arbitrary, that they're based on principles of perception and that sort of thing. And we'll revisit these ideas when I go forward and talk about design specifics. But first, I did want to kind of circle back to a significant factor, which is like, what is a poster, as opposed to something else? The definition that I like is a poster is a visual communication that, or a visual and audio communication that prompts further interest in a given topic. So it's not a paper, it's not a chapter, it is a medium unique to itself. And that's why the other important part of this sort of phrase is that it prompts further interest in a given topic, because it can't contain everything that you have to say. It's basically an abstract. If you think about like a map cannot be as detailed as the world around it, because it would need to therefore be like the same size and with as much detail as the world around it. So instead, you take sort of the most important stuff, the thing you're trying to draw your audience's attention to, identify that, and then leave everything else off of it. Similarly, that's what a poster is, right? Compared to an article or your entire body of research. It's intended to point people to your information and draw them in to engage with your research, or of course, to engage with you. So, what makes a good research poster? Four kind of big factors I think that come into play is that it's organized, which means it's, of course, easy to follow the information on the poster. It's readable, which means that it's interesting and enjoyable to read. It's legible, which is different than readable. Legible is the sort of visual, like it's visually easy to see it and to read it. And then it's succinct, which is really that it includes only the important information, leaves off the unimportant information. And so this afternoon, basically, I'm going to touch on these three major themes: the what is your content and message; the who's your audience to receive your message. But mostly what I'm talking about is this third thing, which is how do we effectively deliver messages to our audience through specific design choices in layout, in text, in color, and graphics. And then that word effectively is kind of the key, I think. What I mean is that through our design choices, how do we make it as easy as possible for them to hear your message? How do we reduce the friction of the person who's trying to understand what you're saying? You know, how do you keep them from not being able to understand it because of your design choices? So let's start, of course, first with content, your message. And of course, that is for you to know, not for me. What do you want your audience to know about your research? It certainly can't be everything from your research. So again, think about the map. You don't want to show every road, every puddle, every sewer cover, every piece of trash. You know, you can't do that. So what's the main thing you want to convey? You identify that and then use that to steer your design choices. Are you, reinforcing that message or distracting from it, from your choices? And if you're distracting from it, by, often it's by including unnecessary information. And I should say unnecessary related to your poster design, not unnecessary to your research necessarily. But if you are distracting from it by including unnecessary information, that's the stuff you want to get rid of, because you want to keep a pure through line, clear communication of your initial message. Give me a sec. And then once you've settled on a message, you do want to convey it kind of as simply as you can to reach the widest swath of your particular audience. Your first opportunity to do that is in the title of your poster. Note, like on the screen, the top title is pretty convoluted, happens to include a Latin binomial, the Sciurus carolinensis, which is the eastern gray squirrel. That is a pretty common titling approach, this kind of jargon-filled, like I'm here for these experts kind of thing. Consider instead perhaps a plain language. Of course, this is a highly plain language example, but just to think about what you're conveying with your title and convey it as simply as your audience would require. And we'll talk about that in a sec. The other thing to consider is how your titling sort of does or doesn't convey results of research. It is very common to do titling like at the top, which, this genetic and environmental effects of these things, an analysis, doesn't tell you what the result is. It just says, I have set up this thing, my topic is this. Like, instead, consider where possible, if you have a sort of clear result, include your result in the title, because that's what people are here to find out. They're not here to find that you did a study on a topic. They want to know what the result of that study was. Introduce that to them right out of the gate. And when I keep talking about them, your audience, what I'm really talking about is consider your audience first, or at least very much second, right behind what message you want to convey to them. By knowing who your audience is, that will help you make the sort of the right choices for what you want to say on your poster. You can speak in, far more technical detail on a poster if you know that your entire audience is made up of people with the same kind of background and training that you have, that work in your same field, right? Your kind of narrow field. In those situations, you can let jargon creep in if, because you all share that jargon, it serves to make things easier or clearer instead of more confusing. So don't add friction, kind of, again, to the process through the use of jargon with people who don't know what you're talking about. where that starts coming up is more like if this sort of middle example, right? You know, like if people who are viewing your poster are coming not just from your field, but from a range of related disciplines, but not specifically your field. You know, if, for instance, they are scientists and you are a chemist, or, you know, they are sociologists and you're focused specifically on education, that kind of thing, you know. So if you're addressing this range of discipline, you can kind of pitch your poster's language to people who at least share some common background, right? Compare that again to the third, which is, you know, sort of speaking with the general public, people who really, you know, don't bring specialty knowledge to your topic at all. Think about how you might explain your research to your neighbor who works in a totally different industry or field. You would approach that very differently than talking with colleagues who do work in that field. Your poster should be designed differently. Sort of your major sin is to use the wrong approach to a poster given the audience. So just a thing to bear in mind. So having considered, of course, your message and your audience, so we get to the sort of the how. What are some of the specific design choices that you can make to make it easy for them to follow your research? I can do like hour-long topics on each of these kind of things. So I'm really just going to touch on some highlights, some broad guidance here. We are very happy to answer questions at the end or afterwards. But first, I want to offer some things to consider with your overall layout. Research posters were introduced in the early 1970s, actually. We're basically at about 50 years of this idea of posters. Started in the sciences, have broadened beyond that now. They've been pretty consistent in terms of design throughout that time, which is kind of sad in a certain way. You know, this is a pretty common one, right? Like, here's my poster, it has background, I offer a hypothesis, I have done an experiment, say, lots of results, and then I summarize that at the end, right? Summarize that. Other disciplines, or, you know, there are another common approach is this, where it's more like an introduction. Let me show you my research questions. Let me talk method, results, a discussion and references and acknowledgements. You know, a lot of disciplines or calls for posters don't let you alter an approach that, you know, is common in the field, or they say every poster must have these certain things. If that's the case, of course, when you're responding to that call for posters, you should address the things they want you to, because you want them to accept your poster. But this approach, and the one in the slide before, is really actually not a great like information design actually for a visual medium like posters, especially where, you know, especially in a room where people are navigating through a space and looking at posters, but even virtually, same kind of thing. What you want to do is catch people's attention. So if you have a choice, I recommend considering a structure that's similar to a newspaper article. This is not a poster design. This illustration is to illustrate this idea. I'm not suggesting this is how you design your poster, though it would certainly stand out. But this is a common way of illustrating the way journalists approach writing articles, where instead of putting the conclusion at the very end, bottom right corner, as it were, you lead with that, right? What happened, why it matters, the who, the what, the when, the where, the why. And then important details to support this, and then kind of general information and background information. The result of that might look something like this, where there's a clear title again at the top. This one has a conclusion, right? It makes squirrels overeat. And then a bold call out, basically right at the beginning, that tells people why they should care about your poster. You don't want them to have to search for that information on your poster. Help them to know if this is the poster for them, or if they should move on. And then next, I want to talk a little bit about text, introducing both in terms of kind of numbers of words and the appearance of words. And remember, like I started out saying, that succinct is one of the 4 big areas of what makes an effective poster design, of it only including important information. Way too often people try to cram like huge amounts of text onto their posters. And the result is basically a giant wall of text that nobody is actually interested in reading while standing there in a room or peering at a computer screen. Remember, fundamentally, your poster is not your paper. It's not a chapter. It's not your book. It's a kind of almost a teaser, right? And you make people work too hard if you confront them with a lot of text. And it actually literally physically makes people anxious to see this big wall of text. So you really do want to cut it only to the essentials. You want to reduce, again, the friction of their experience. And if you do that, the result is that people can really kind of get to the most important information quickly through the design choices you made. And it also opens up your design so it breathes a little bit more if you've restricted the amount of text that you've got, which again, actually literally reduces people's anxiety levels. So one sort of good way to do that, though it's actually not well illustrated in my fairly blurry illustration here, is using a lot of bullets and bold, like bold key things, bullets instead of big paragraphs. Because again, it is a medium that is intended for sort of perusing, not for detailed study. So you sort of have to realize that you're writing differently. And one easy way is to sort of bullet points about how like your research methodology was done instead of a narrative paragraph, that sort of thing. So another aspect of textual design that often worries a lot of people is this question of fonts, right? And whether it's better to use a font with serifs, which are of course the little projections at the end of letter shapes, right? Or better, quote unquote, to use one without it, which is called a sans serif font. I will just note that there's some indication that because people tend to read by word shape instead of one letter at a time, a font with serifs, like the body text with serif, is considered better for a block of text. But that is not a definitive statement. There's research kind of goes both ways on that. I would say that far more important is that you choose a font that is clear and easy to read. You might certainly consider doing a contrast in style like I've done here between a header that is serif and a main body text that is sans serif, or vice versa, just as a design question. That's a lovely thing. But I would suggest don't mix more than 2 or maybe 3 fonts on a single poster. And like, here's a nice design of, this is obviously not a research poster, but that uses only 2 fonts. It's technically 3 because the $10 per person is actually separate fonts, and then really 4 if you want to count the logo. But really it's 2 principal fonts. Or typefaces if you prefer. So it's nicely balanced with almost the entire body is just, or the entire body of the poster is done as a sans serif font, and just the title has a serif, the yoga has serif. And then the contrast is done through color intensity choices actually instead, which is nice. Which leads me nicely to color. One of the big ways to help people navigate through your poster is through your choices of color. Remember, you don't want some wild field of colors or nobody will be able to tell where to look. So you see a poster like this and it's really hard to tell. I mean, yes, Hamfest stands out as a big red thing, but the details, very hard to tell where to go for that. Contrast that again with something like this, which is using really 2 principal colors. There's also a little bit of black and white in there as well. But the color choices are being used to draw attention to things. So for instance, there's blue on orange, stands out, or a more intense orange on a lighter orange stands out. The fact that there's really only 2 principal shades keeps it as a sort of calmer overall experience, certainly compared with the poster prior to it. One thing I do want to mention is to be careful in your poster design on the question of color blindness. There are color blindness, color blindness affects, something like 10% of the population, 8 to 10%, I think, of the population. There are checkers, not like the game checkers, but a technical tool, color blindness checkers that you can use to look at your design to see how colorblind people might see it. One of the big things, the one that I like is called Color Oracle, and we'll link to that in our resources. But you use these to test your design to make sure that even if people aren't seeing the colors that you are, they can at least see that you've got contrasting colors, so stuff can stand out. For instance, here, this picture, with the most common form of color blindness, this picture of peas and carrots actually looks like this to people with this most common form of color blindness. So again, apologies to anyone there who is currently colorblind. This slide gets even more confusing. But it is hard to differentiate colors on this because it's all become this sort of uniform. And again, that color oracle and also some other resources related to sort of considerations for color blindness will end up on our resource page as well. And then finally, I just want to give a few quick tips on graphics, i.e. the images that you'll include in your poster to help people understand your research. Usually that shows up in the form of illustrations, which are usually either showing some sort of process or helping people to quickly identify sort of the topic of your poster, or as charts and graphs. And here's an example of what I meant when I said that they can help people understand the topic of your poster. So if you look at this, the title of this is Personality, Sex Differences, and Mate Choice in the European Sarin. And so if I'm looking at posters, if I'm cruising past posters, and I don't know what a European Sarin is, I wouldn't know what this poster is actually about. You know, is a sarin a fish? Is it algae? Is it a mammal? But I can see from the illustration choice on this poster that it's a bird. So now that I can decide, you know, very quickly whether this is a poster of interest to me. Again, I have reduced the friction, right, of the viewer of my poster. Now they know quickly what my topic is. So general illustration can certainly be helpful, but also you want to be thoughtful about that and not just cram your poster full of illustrations instead of more substantive information. And then a note about charts and graphs. Please, I beg you, please, don't just use default graph that gets generated by most software like Excel or Tableau or other graph generators. So they often will leave way too much clutter on your chart that is really unnecessary to the viewer, to the poster viewer. So the cleaner you can make it, the better, you know, keeping only the essentials. So if you look at these two, the top one versus the bottom one, see how much has been left off from the first one to make the second one cleaner, like the hundredths digits for the numbers on the y-axis, the horizontal words on the bottom for the x-axis. Those have been abbreviated, that the horizontal lines have been removed because, again, they don't really need to read all the way across. Typically, you just want to understand trends as a general rule. And the big one is that the labels for the two, the red and the blue lines, have been attached to the lines so that they are not, so that the person navigating this doesn't have to keep looking up at the line and then down at a key and up at the line and down at a key. As we all know, that's a big pain. So the idea is to match color and labels right on that. So there's a lot of that kind of processing that can be done with graphs. And again, we're happy to help with that in my department, along with all these design things. And then last but not least for me, a quick note about format of graphics, specifically about resolution of images. Remember that just because an image works well on a computer screen, that doesn't mean that it'll work well in print or in a electronic poster that somebody could zoom into, depending on like if it's a PDF or that sort of thing. Screen resolutions are way lower than print resolutions. Ideal for print, and I'll just talk about that just briefly, is 300 dots per inch, which means that if the image on your print poster is 10 inches across, that's, you know, your original image will need to be 3,000 pixels across, 3,000 dots across. Remember that something can look good when it's small and then look all pixelated when it's blown up bigger. It's probably hard for you to tell on Zoom, but on the left-hand side, this cat looks great small and large. The puppy on the right looks great small, but has gotten pixelated because I blew up a small image and got it all pixelated. So that's not so good. Again, I am happy to answer questions sort of at the end, but I did want to give you a whirlwind tour of some graphic design considerations, and then I will hand it off now to Carla May for the next phase. So I guess I will stop my share so you can do yours. Happy to answer questions at the end or on the chat.
Thank you, Eric. All right, folks, give me a second to switch over. Can everyone see my screen all right? We're good? Okay. So hello again, everyone. Carla May, and I'm going to be talking about delivery considerations. And some of this may sound a little familiar from what Eric spoke about. It builds on what he said. But I'm going to start out by discussing the elements that need to be addressed no matter what the format of the poster session, and then a couple of things that are specific to either to either an in-person or a virtual format. So the first thing we're going to talk about is audience. And again, this is sort of what Eric was getting at, but so just the way that your audience influences your design choices, it also shapes how you present your content. So some of this will be determined by your discipline. So folks in STEM may be more conservative than folks in the arts and humanities, but there's also variation within a discipline. So a good place to start in determining sort of the overall vibe of your conference is on the conference website. And you can also think about the tone of the language in the call for your poster proposal. So good places to start. The next thing you want to think about is how you choose to dress for your presentation, which is also influenced by your audience. So while poster sessions do tend to be a little bit more informal than presentations, it's still a professional setting. So with that in mind, think again about the culture of your discipline and how you might dress to go to work or for an interview. So, don't forget that poster sessions are terrific networking opportunities and you want to make a good impression. You definitely want to be comfortable, as that puts you in a better position to have engaging conversations. But when in doubt, it's probably better to be a little bit overdressed rather than underdressed. Even when you're doing a poster session virtually, for example, via Zoom, as we are here, looking pulled together can help you get in the correct headspace to present. And once you've gotten your audience in mind to frame your session and you've figured out the appropriate outfit, you're going to need to practice what you're going to say. So in a poster session, you won't be making one long speech. You'll be having a series of short conversations. However, most of them will start with, "So tell me what your poster is about." Things will go a lot more smoothly if you have your overview and key talking points figured out beforehand. And it helps even more if you can test them out with an audience. So ask some colleagues or friends to be your test subjects, letting you get a feel for sharing your talking points and fielding questions and feedback. Doing this can help you troubleshoot issues beforehand, especially any related to technology in either an in-person or virtual setting. And overall, you'll be more relaxed on the day of your presentation if that is not the first time that you're doing it. So again, Eric mentioned this, but be concise. So the poster as a format is a streamlined way to introduce people to your research. Think trailer rather than movie. So just as you wouldn't put too much text on your poster, you want to keep that in mind when you speak about your content. Your introduction and talking points should be like an elevator pitch, a brief, persuasive speech that takes about 20 seconds to deliver. And you're passionate about your research, so you might be tempted to go on at length, but again, keep your audience in mind. They're trying to sample as many posters in a session as they can and not just yours. So additionally, there are often multiple people trying to talk to you at the same time. So this is not the time for extended monologues. However, this is the time to put on your cocktail party hat and be personable, friendly, and outgoing. Your audience will have many choices on who to engage and for how long, and you want to make it easy for them to connect with you. So this means looking around, making eye contact with people, maintaining an open body position even when you're waiting, rather than standing with your arms crossed or burying yourself in your phone. So let your enthusiasm for your research show, but remember you're having conversations, not lecturing. So leave plenty of room for questions, feedback, and even criticism, and accept it all graciously. All the points I've made before this have to do with presenting your poster content in real time. However, posters are usually available for participants to view outside of the designated poster session time. So your poster should be well enough designed to be self-explanatory without you. However, if you have the option, it doesn't hurt to create either an audio or video recording of your introductory overview and talking points. And this is especially the case if you're using a digital poster platform or if you're in a virtual conference setting. It's a great way to add a little bit of the personal element people enjoy during a poster session. And it's an opportunity for you to contextualize your research so the viewer can quickly grasp it. So now let's talk about a couple of delivery considerations that are only relevant when you're doing a poster session in person. For starters, it may seem like a no-brainer, but when you're discussing your poster content, it can help viewers if you point to the relevant sections as you discuss them. This can be especially helpful if you've gathered a large enough crowd that some folks are too far away to immediately get close enough to read details for themselves. That way, if they hear something they're interested in, they can wait around until they can get closer if they want. It also just makes for a more engaging experience. Think about the difference between a presenter who stands behind a podium reading versus someone who walks around and gestures TED Talk style. And if you've connected to your viewers really well and they want to learn more about your research, you may want to provide handouts. So this can be as simple as your business card, so people can contact you at a later date with more in-depth questions. But if you've created a digital platform for your research, such as a blog or website, you may also want to create stickers to put that information on the back of your cards. If you want to go one step further, and this is especially important if you cite several sources such as books, articles, or websites that you think viewers might be interested in, you could even create flyers with that information on them. And at conferences, you'll see that poster presenters will often tack pockets, like paper pockets, to the board where their poster is with these types of materials so that they're available for viewers even when the presenter is no longer there. So now let's talk about a couple of things you want to consider when you are delivering your poster in a virtual format. Primarily, the software platform you present your poster on will shape how you present and how your audience can interact with you. So will you be using Zoom or some other video conferencing tool? Will your poster be a PDF, a PowerPoint, or some other format? Is there a limit on how many people can join you at any one time? Can you incorporate audio or video? These are all factors my colleague Hope will cover more in depth after me. But as I mentioned before, prepare to practice using the platform that you've been assigned to use. And then once you've become familiar with your platform, you need to set the stage for your presentation, your virtual space, by managing your background, lighting, and sound. So like your dress, you want it to be professional. If you don't have an appropriate space and you have the option, you might want to experiment with a virtual background. Keep in mind that they can be a little distracting. I'm sure some of us have experienced this already where people are sort of phasing in and out of their background, and that is not awesome. And you also don't want to choose anything too elaborate or busy. So if you present against a blank wall that contrasts well with you, that will help your virtual background work a lot better. So just as an example, myself and my shirt are sort of a warm, brighter color, and my background and my chair are gray. So this would make a better setup if I was trying to use a virtual background. So something else is when you're planning for good lighting, you're going to want to do a test run at the time of day that you're presenting. You might need to temporarily shift lamps around or rearrange your furniture so that you're facing a window. And if you're not confident that you won't have background noise, you might want to present with a headset to make sure that you can be heard clearly. So last, as with an in-person presentation, you will want to make your contact info easily available to your viewers. So virtual poster presentations often take place in breakout rooms, virtual breakout rooms, where participants can drop in and out in attempts to replicate the experience of an in-person poster session. And you may be presenting using a couple of slides, like a short PowerPoint. So it can help to have your contact information, such as an email address, on all of your slides, so that no matter when a participant pops in, it's available to them. And you could also try just pasting your email address into the chat box if there is one, for people to have that available there. So the big takeaway here on poster delivery considerations is to tailor everything to the needs of your audience, to make it easier for them to quickly and effectively connect with you and your research. So now I'm going to turn things over to Hope to tell you a little bit about digital posters.
Thank you so much, Carla May. And bear with me as we pass the mic as it is. Okay, so now we're going to be moving into some considerations to weigh for digital posters. We'll look at a couple of platforms and follow up with some tips for these formats, with a particular emphasis on audio and video elements. So, as many of our meetings and conferences are going to be conducted completely virtually this year, we have found that a variety of platforms are being used to organize these meetings, well beyond the tools for scheduling sessions or rooms. These platforms support different levels of live and asynchronous interaction, and you may find that you have either a lot of flexibility in design and the type of files you can use, or a much more rigid set of expectations. So it's important for us to familiarize ourselves with whatever platform we find ourselves working with. Again, while many conference planning committees have kept the parameters for digital poster submissions pretty flexible, for example, you might be able to submit like a high resolution image that you put together, one of your favorite tools, whether it's PowerPoint or Photoshop, with a layout of your choice. In other situations, you're going to be asked to develop prescribed sections and follow a very particular layout. So many conference committees have also elected to use platforms specifically developed for digital posters. I looked at a few, and that seem to have a lot of traction in academia, but I kind of want to hear from y'all too. If you could just take a moment and type in the chat the name of any digital poster platforms you may have come across as you've been looking at different conference RFPs. I think I saw one already mentioned in the chat. I think I've lost the audience, so I'll keep moving on. We did have one person that mentioned Eposter. Oh, and now I'm seeing Zoom. And, you know, a lot of times depending, Microsoft Teams. So we're seeing a lot of communication platforms being leveraged for poster presentations. And what I'm going to focus on is more of the things that are geared towards conferences and posters in particular. The other thing you might notice is that you may not know what poster platform you're using. A conference committee may brand something to the point that it's indistinguishable from the actual software that it is being used to generate it. So let's take a look at a couple of these different platforms. This first one is Eposter. It kind of stands apart from most other platforms because it not only supports sharing digital posters, it's used to create the posters. So there are templates, just like if you were to build a poster in PowerPoint, but these might be locked or limited to have consistency at a conference. The layout shown here is built of content boxes. And you may note the word open at the bottom of several of these boxes. When you click inside there, that will expand to accommodate more information, and you can scroll through that once you click in. And while it might be tempting to drop in huge blocks of text from your related papers, you've written this, you know, you've got to keep in mind that this is a poster still. So all that advice we have heard about being concise is still applicable. And I chose this particular example because there's a few different things going on here, including some nice GIFs that demonstrate how you may illustrate some sequential data in a meaningful way. Some other features in this layout include the box on the top left, where you can include up to about 10 images for authors or institutional affiliations, which is a great way to personalize your poster. At the opposite side on the bottom right, you see that abstract and contact information are generally included as part of this format. And you might also notice that most content boxes, with the exception of that intro and conclusions, lead with images rather than text, rendering, you know, a more visually appealing composition. Just to get under the hood, we're going to take a look at what the Eposter content box editor looks like. Oops, let me scroll back there. So my mouse is getting away from me, y'all. There we go. So the Eposter editor has many of the same features of all sorts of content development tools you're probably already using. And so I'd like to touch on a couple of these with a little bit more detail. So we have that insert image option over at number 2. This will allow you to embed high resolution images, and they allow quite large image files. So you don't have to feel that you need to reduce the size, losing that clarity that Eric mentioned. You'll also want to add tables, charts, and diagrams and graphs with the insert image option. More often than not, the quality of the create chart option over at number 6 is pretty weak compared to other tools that you might find for creating similar graphics. So what you'll want to do is export those as image files or simply take screenshots and upload them. File types are limited for that insert image option to JPEGs, PNGs, and GIFs. So that's something to keep in mind too. The next thing I want you to take a look at, number 3, we have insert video. With this particular platform, your video actually isn't going to live here. It needs to live somewhere else on the web. So you need a URL. And that means you need to post the video somewhere like YouTube or Vimeo. At number 4, we have that insert audio option. The only file type that is accepted on this platform is an MP3. They provide a converter tool within their system. And they also have a recording option directly into the system. You're probably going to get better results doing that on your computer first and then uploading now. Over at number 8 is a key component that sets digital posters apart from their print counterparts. It's the option to add links, which allow you to keep your poster more streamlined and then still connect your audience to all sorts of additional information and resources. So pretty standard fare. Our next example is Eposter Live. And this pretty much falls in the category of platform that primarily serves to store posters, index them, and connect them with the audience. They also have a fairly well-developed system for in-person electronic poster displays, allowing presenters to upload their posters in advance for a face-to-face event and not have to travel with printed stuff. With that in mind, this system is a bit more of a bridge bringing traditional print posters into an online space, rather than all the bells and whistles you may find to build into something like Eposter. With this setup, it's far more likely that you're going to be asked to record a 5-minute audio or video presentation that can be played along with the poster rather than break all the multimedia elements up into the poster itself. Anyhow, on the left side of your screen is the interface for uploading the poster. And it's pretty typical for the process across different types of conferences and platforms. Up at the top of the screen, there are 4 steps. The first is a submission code. You'd get this from your conference communications when a poster is accepted. They'll then have you generate your own data so that the poster is correctly indexed with your title, authors, other data for step 2. Then you upload the actual poster files and maybe those audio or video clips at step 3 before reviewing all of those inputs for your submission at step 4. A good thing to know is that if there happen to be errors in any of these pieces and parts, usually you can easily submit updates with this type of a system, which also encourages great big image files. So that's one thing that appears to be consistent among the platforms that I looked at. No image file size limits, because they know that the better the resolution is, the better the experience will be for everybody. So over on the right side of the screen, the result of the many submissions that might be collected for a conference and indexed and displayed on a grid page. And you may notice up at the top, there are options to look at posters by title, authors, affiliations, topics, or some kinds of sessions. Wow. This is likely the view that many conference attendees are going to be seeing this year. The largely online nature of poster sessions provide a great opportunity to search for posters that most interest you and others, meaning that it could be more likely that you're going to see an increase of traffic to your posters. So you definitely want to make a good impression. And where are we at on time? Because I know we're getting tight. Let's see my clock. Okay, I will try to get through my tips as quickly as possible, y'all. So, oops. All these platforms vary, but there are some things that are going to come into play no matter what poster platform you're working with. And while many of these elements are going to be found in either print or digital, the electronic delivery and viewership of online posters brings up some other things to think about. First, with text elements, beyond the typical headings, body, and captions, you'll need to consider positioning your links within appropriate descriptive text. For example, rather than providing a URL address written out, create a hyperlink that describes the resource you are directing your viewers to. You also need to look at your images and provide alt text to describe them for your viewers who are using screen readers. Alt text is also a really good opportunity for you to think of the central message of your images and whether you're addressing the meaning of them in the body text. Now with images, I always like to take the opportunity to remind folks to use images that have a purpose. Most often with our academic posters, our images show relationships or represent our data and all those other considerations that Eric brought to us. Audio and video, I'd like to just hit back to Carla's attention on preparation and practice as being most central. You also need to think about sequencing. It's going to be important to determine how things are going to be presented, whether that specific formula is going to be prescribed or how you need to chunk things out on your own. Will you have something like those content boxes over an iPoster, or will you be presenting a series of slides on Zoom? Finally, digital posters provide us with all sorts of advantages in terms of flexibility. People can view them from all over the world and at any time and on repeat if they feel like it. So their digital nature and the fact that we may not know the needs of our audience also means we need to build in some flexibility. So providing captions or transcripts to your audio and video content. This is super easy because you've prepared and practiced and written a script. But also things like making sure that you're using headers and other formatting features appropriately. So your submission is going to be screen reader ready. To further underscore its importance, audio recordings should have well-developed and rehearsed scripts. When recording, choose a quiet time and place to record. Consider breaking up your recording into smaller segments, because it's usually easier to make smaller recordings and string them together than try to make one long recording in one shot, right? Next thing, microphone. You're going to want to find the best device you have at your fingertips. It may be your phone for your recording, maybe not so much your computer microphone. Test that out, figure out how you can best capture your audio, and then place that microphone near you and then away from things like little humming fans on your computer or other distracting noises. And finally, listen to your work as you go. You want to catch any mistakes or issues as quickly as possible. Particularly, the most common one is that your capturing recording is too low to be heard. And so you want to make sure you catch that early so you're recording as loudly and clearly as possible. It can be really helpful to use headphones when you're going through that kind of task. And our last little thing, video tech tips. So wrapping up, let's also note that beyond scripting your words, if you're recording video, you need to plan out what people are going to see as well. And they may just be seeing your poster, but they may be seeing you. So if they're going to see you, play around with your location, take advantage of things like sunlight from windows. If you have to be in a particular place, see if additional lighting from a small lamp can be positioned to improve the look. And your spoken words, moving back to sound or audio, is going to need to be just as clear as you can make it again. You might find that though your web camera is doing a great job of capturing your facial expression, the microphone just isn't that great. So you can visit your computer settings, make adjustments to your inputs that work best with the equipment that you have. And don't forget to listen as you go to make sure it's loud enough. Last but not least, frame your video, whether it's slightly centering your face or your gaze, or ensuring that your images are in a similar dimension to how they're going to be viewed. In other words, do your best to compose an image that has enough room for your entire head and for other shots. Take care that it lines up nicely with the format. As a general rule of thumb, we live in a 16:9 widescreen world these days. That's where we're at present. And wow, thank you. That was a lot of information. So I'd like to turn it over for questions and discussion. Thank you.
We have some questions that were accumulating in the chat. The first one that I saw was, if you know, what is the cost of iPoster and ePoster?
So typically, iPoster and ePoster is purchased as part of a conference. And so that cost is passed on to you when you register. So you don't generally buy your access to ePoster or iPoster. That's one of those costs that's rolled into your conference registration fee.
And then the other question that I saw in the chat was, can we export the digital poster and then embed them in a different website after the conference?
That is a really good question. And I would anticipate that some platforms make it more difficult and some make it harder. Carla May or Eric, do you have any experience with that?
I had to use iPoster for a conference, but I think part of the issue with exporting that one is because you can expand those content buckets. You can imagine if you export it, it's going to cut off where those buckets, so it will be a graphic, a 2D graphic, and not the interactive thing that the original format is. So usually I would suggest that you create an alternative for yourself that is more like a traditional 2D poster, because you know, you're just not going to have that same interactive option as the iPoster setup.
Thank you. Makes a lot of sense. Thanks.
I see a question about the platforms other than PowerPoint to create graphics. I guess I'll jump in on that one. There certainly are, there's a lot of different platforms you can use for doing content creation. PowerPoint is sort of a default because it's actually pretty easy to do and offers some good functionality. But there are other like desktop publishing platforms. Adobe InDesign is a big one. Microsoft Publisher, certainly. There's one called Scribus, which is a free one. And I've got a whole bunch of resources that, again, we'll make sure get shared out to everybody, as well as, talks about desktop publishing and layout stuff, also graphic design software. So things like Adobe Spark, which is a free one, other kind of free web graphic creation tool or web-based graphic creation tools. And then of course there are things like Photoshop, which is much more advanced and of course expensive if you don't otherwise have access to it, or Illustrator, Adobe Illustrator, which help people do those graphic design work as well. And then I saw the other part of that question was about improving graphics resolution. And I guess I would say, feel free to contact me to sort of talk through specifically what's the question about improving graphics resolution. Broadly speaking, sort of echoing what Hope said, the higher the better resolution, because that gives you more flexibility. You can always downscale something. There's differences in vector illustration versus bitmap, but anyway, we can talk about that kind of thing too. So, yeah, you just want to aim for high resolution, however possible, again, depending on your platform.
See, Julie's answered I think the last question from chat. Thank you. And we're at 1 o'clock. So thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
I appreciate everybody coming.
I'm going to stop the recording now.